And I kind of have a spreadsheet to try to be like, let me take something that's really an ambiguous question. Who should I spend most time with to learn about this market, to learn about how investors think about our market, who are going to have the most information and insight on this market? And I, tried to kind of put a framework around it. And so I did this, and just, it's like desk work, you do it when you have the time. And it got me down to this list. Instead of having 20, big banks, some of which are the big name banks and some of which are the smaller investment banks on my list, and feeling like I had to give each of them a little bit of time and attention or go to one of their conferences, I ended up with a much shorter list, right? And then I could really focus on those folks and really build deeper relationships with those folks.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. What you're about to hear is an interview I did with Sarah Spoja, the CFO of Tipalti. We talk about M&A as a growth lever. She comes from an extensive background of private equity operations where she would get her hands dirty and help companies bring their products to market, and even get her hands dirty with like setting up payment systems at Clover. It's a hilarious story. We talk about reinventing yourself during growth and how as a CFO, if you're at a company that goes from say 100 to 1,000 people in like 3 years, you have to reinvent yourself like every 6 months. And you also have to put down a lot of the things you were doing and reassess what's the best use of my time here. And part of reassessing the best use of your time is how much of that should be external facing. It's like once you hit 100 million or 200 million in revenue and you're growing at a good clip and you look like you're going to be the next big name out there that could potentially IPO, you get a ton of requests to participate in conferences and on panels. So how do you pick which ones to engage in? She has a remarkable framework for doing that. And how does a CFO avoid being perceived as always in market? How do you be upfront with investors to say that you're just building a relationship and not always think that the company is up for investment or for sale? And finally, she talks about the role of sales. Yes, Walter, you love sales too. How you're always selling yourself and the company to prospective hires. And yeah, it's a great podcast. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. Bull market, bear market. Rates will rise, rates will fall. Can someone please just invent a crystal ball already? Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their companies with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. Whether you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If you listen to this podcast, you'll know I ask CFOs all the time to rep their tech stacks, and I would say almost every one of them use NetSuite. And that's what I would use too. Whether you're a company earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/metrics. The guide is free to you. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, it's netsuite.com/metrics. Please, guys, I really need this. Being an operator is not for the faint of heart. It often feels like you're jumping out of an airplane and building the parachute on your way down. CEOs, CFOs, COOs, and BizOps leaders feel my pain. That's why I joined Operators Guild. It's home to more than 1,000 of the most elite, high-growth operators in the world. Think the Special Forces for business scale. Members have access to over 150 in-person events across all 25 global chapters. The modern startup founder, CFO, and COO are really just multidisciplinary problem solvers, which is why having the best problem solvers together has created the ultimate diversity intelligence of any operator group in the world. Operators Guild gave me the chance to meet my own personal board of directors, people I can bounce ideas off of, and their online forum allows you to get answers from your peers as questions pop up. Like, how do I run an employee secondary? Or what should I pay as a base commission rate on SaaS deals? I've made great friends through attending their highly acclaimed OG Summit and frequently attend their online masterclasses taught by the best tech operators in the business. Join Operators Guild and access the Navy SEALs of high-growth business scaling, a group built by operators for operators. Learn more and apply at operators-guild.com. That's operators-guild.com, and tell them CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. Sarah, welcome to the Run the Numbers podcast.
Thanks, CJ. Thanks for having me here.
So we've got an agenda chock full of riveting topics. And what I love about your career is you've gone from one side of the table to the other, having started doing M&A and being in private equity operations. And now you're a CFO at a high growth SaaS company. And so when we talk about M&A as a growth lever, based on your experience, being at KKR and now coming over to the operator side, what's your take on the M&A environment that we're currently in?
Yeah, let's start with a heavy hitter question. That sounds great. So briefly my background, I was a consultant at Bain for 4 years and did Stanford for Business School and then went to KKR in their portfolio operations team. It's called KKR Capstone. And so it's large cap private equity portfolio operations. And the role is really to sit alongside the management teams of the portfolio companies that we own and to work on projects, initiatives like turnarounds. It could either be cost or revenue growth or new product expansion. And oftentimes it came down to M&A. And so doing kind of roll-ups or adding various products to their portfolio. And yeah, I think that was really the first time that I spent really deep amount of time thinking about M&A and then also doing it from the ownership view, because ultimately as a KKR employee, I was highly compensated to make sure that these investments would work out well for the companies. And so sort of this combination of advising on management teams, while also working with the investment teams. And, I'll say right now, I have been saying that M&A I thought would heat up in, particularly in the US market for the last, 6 quarters or so. And really, I'm talking about here, startup M&A, companies being acquired by larger late stage or public companies. You're seeing a lot of buyouts on the private equity side now as well, which is also heating up. I was probably admittedly a little early to that, but I do think that it has now started to come to fruition where there used to still be kind of too much money that had been raised by these companies. And so they're still burning, but they were burning more slowly and they still had runway. And then also kind of the bid to ask spread of what they were looking for just needed to come more closely aligned with, what buyers would be interested in buying. And I think we're now seeing a lot more of that in late 24. And I can only imagine into 25. I think both those things are going to really heat up. I am sure that my inbox is not an anomaly of the number of sell-side banker notes that I'm getting. And, some of them seem really relevant to like our space, but a lot of them are nowhere close to the business that Tipalti does. And in those situations, it just feels like a spray and pray type of approach from sell-side bankers. And so, all of those things point to the fact that there's a lot of companies out there who are subscale in size. They might have really good products, but building distribution and tech for kind of point solutions is really costly. And, I think there's going to be a boom and interesting roll-ups at play in a number of markets, whether it be, office of the CMO or CRO or CFO or other spots.
That's amazing. So much to unpack there. I feel like it's been this hurry up and wait for like 24 months at least. I say 24 months to sound fancy. It's really just 2 years. But I was sitting in the same seat, I felt like in, late 2023 saying, oh man, there's going to be so much consolidation. There's going to be so many of these M&A deals bubbling up to the surface. And I don't know. It felt like crickets.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of that was sort of the bid to ask going on. And then also that they just still had money, but it definitely feels like it's heating up more recently. And, again, my point of view here is probably more biased towards enterprise technology, spaces that need, a true sales force and true marketing engine behind them to be successful. I think in PLG and more self-selling onboarding stuff, like there's still paths to building good distribution at, fraction of the cost. But I do think people are now realizing that the cost of that distribution model, or rather the benefit of having an existing scale distribution model that you can push your products through, is a huge benefit. And in many of these spaces, there's just not a lot of scaled assets. And so this idea of platforms coming together with point solutions that are subscale, actually creating a broader, more diverse product offering, I think buyers are buying differently now. And therefore that platform solution is even more important. Yeah, I just think I think it's really interesting what's happening now. And I think what you're seeing is all these kind of call it 10 million in ARR businesses realizing that it's really costly to build distribution. In a lot of these areas, the partnerships and channel side of it is really important. And that can take years to build. And you just don't have years to go after and build it now. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I guess I'll tell the story from the other side, which is
Sure.
when I think about my tech stack, like I have a solution, and I'm not going to name names for this one, but I have a solution. It's a smaller startup, and their product is really, really great. And so it was a bit of a risky decision to say, like, I'm going to go with that company in my tech stack, given that we're quite late stage, and that it's just an important decision to be made. And it's one that would have required a lot of implementation, and so kind of a lot of yield loss would have happened. And so when that company was going in fundraising, I actually took meetings with their future potential investors. And it's not because I'm like a particularly nice person or give away my time very easily. It's that company getting funded and actually kind of beating the odds around fundraising in the market in 22 and 23 was crucially important to me, and my tech stack. And so I was willing to go spend the time.
Wow.
But I think if your customers are like not having to, but wanting to help you get fundraising as a smaller startup in their tech stack, it just tells you what people are thinking out loud and just saying, listen, I really just want to make sure that this gets shorn up because I don't want to have to take you out of my tech stack, but you're also a money burning, smaller company at subscale. So anyway, I think it just for me like resonated when I was saying, yeah, I'll definitely do these calls. It's kind of crazy, to be doing those calls, but that's kind of what it's like these days. And I think if you're a smaller, SaaS company with a point solution, you don't have customers that are willing to like get on the phone and sell you and help you and, build investment dollars, then, I think you got to be thinking about where the next step is and how you're going to get growth.
It's amazing that you could tie it back to a real story about you actually getting on the phone with investors. That's super powerful. And it also exhibits how CFOs like yourself are buying different. It's riskier to take a risk on a company, I feel like, than it was maybe even 3 years ago.
Absolutely. I think it is. And to be fair, maybe 3 years ago was also risky, but it wasn't as in your face risky. I want to say, I'm sure that there were really smart CFOs who had this in their risk profile even a few years ago, but now it's just more of a rampant common knowledge. And, again, I think for that reason, companies in SaaS spaces that are kind of multiple hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue are just in a level of stability and maturity. And there's not as many companies that are of that size. And so I just do think people are buying differently, and that size and scale and sort of maturity, dollars to invest, that the company's going to be around for many years. I think that's really important. And people are now factoring that in as a bigger element into how they make decisions. And maybe they should have been all along, right? But yeah. I certainly think there's a change in the air.
I like how you brought up distribution and then brought up the channel aspect of it that some software companies have, because running a field sales org is like the most expensive way to get your product out there. Now, is it effective? Yes, if you're selling high ticket enough items. I started on the operator side at a company called Veeam, and it was backup and recovery for the enterprise. And we sold through the channel. And being the FP&A manager there, I would look at the P&L and be like, holy shit, this is so expensive to run. We have product overlays, we have channel overlays, we have channel marketing. But now looking back at it, I almost say, if you're going to go all in, you may as well just go all in on it. And that actually becomes a moat at scale, because it took maybe a decade to get those channel relationships and have the likes of a CDW wanting to be a distributor or a reseller.
I think it's absolutely true. And especially in situations in which there is like a core technology. So from the office of CFO, it's, your ERP, right? And so I think in situations where there's a core technology, if you're in a marketing or sales tech stack, it would be like, what's the CRM? But if there's a core technology that kind of is like the brain center of that functional area, those are going to be really crucial partnerships. And whether it's a direct reseller channel or more of a partnership referral channel, it doesn't really matter. It still takes a ton of time to build and build well. It's something that we've prided ourselves on at Tipalti. We were NetSuite's Partner of the Year back in 2019, I think, and then we won the same award this year. And so, NetSuite's been a massive partner to us.
Yeah.
And that's a really important partnership in the SaaS and tech community, because a lot of tech companies run on NetSuite. So that's just like one example but that takes years to build, right? You just don't get there overnight. And so, yeah, I think it's really important. And it can be more costly, but if your conversion rates are higher with those channel partners having influence, if your ACVs are higher for deals that, involve a channel partner, then actually the economics of it can work out.
Totally. Shout out NetSuite, also a friend of the pod. So thank you.
Unexpected.
Yeah, they sponsor this, so I can get my dog, who's just barking, as many biscuits as he wants. Sarah, a lot of M&A ends up I won't mince words here, crushing the souls of the startups that get acquired. How can this be avoided? Because I'm sure you've seen some transactions go through where it culturally was, I don't know, it was awesome. It made sense. Everybody got along, but there's always the other side of the story. And maybe it's even more than 50% of the time that happens. What's your take on that?
Yeah, my guess is it's more than 50%. I think it'd be a fascinating study for someone to go do, particularly with really like large strategics and M&A. I'll give 2 stories on this because I think stories always are the best way to explain things. But the first is during my KKR days, I was working with First Data, which was one of KKR's largest portfolio companies at the time, a massive payments, merchant acquirer and payments company. And I helped them acquire Clover, which at the time of the acquisition, I think First Data had 24,000, 25,000, something like that, employees. And I'm not kidding you, there were 9 employees of Clover when we acquired it. So I don't know if there's ever been something as, wide diversification as far as size goes. And so, yeah, this idea of kind of like what could possibly happen to 9 employees in a 25,000 employee roll up, it's really, a lot of things could have happened, right? The good, the bad, the ugly. I think, for me in that experience, I learned a lot and I got really, really close to the founders of Clover. I actually spent 2 years of my KKR time sitting in Clover's, startup offices, literally doing anything and everything for that team that I could to help.
You were in their offices, almost like a badged employee?
Yeah, no, I was a badge employee. I had, 4 days of the week, I was in a startup office in like jeans and a t-shirt. And then one day a week, I was back in the KKR office in, business formal at KKR and the private equity firm. So it was an amazingly fun time. And honestly, it was the experience that made me want to go build from scratch and build something again, which sort of brought me ultimately to Tipalti. But yeah, it was a really unique experience. But doing it, I was doing a whole bunch of stuff for the company, a whole bunch of stuff for First Data or for Clover. But a couple of the things that we did to try to make sure that we didn't kind of quote unquote crush the souls of our new Clover acquisition was, how do we handle autonomy? How do we handle who gets to make decisions on what things? Like, can you create guardrails, but also give people lots of choice and lots of decision-making authority? And so you look like you're running, a startup inside of a broader company. 2 years there, I spent 2 years working with Clover. And I say working with Clover because the CTO of Clover is still an old and good friend of mine. And like I'd work with him for anything. And so I think the idea that, a private equity executive for a 9-person team could, after 2 years, of an acquisition, and he stayed for 10 at First Data, could still have a good relationship. It doesn't happen all the time. And it was really important to me that it did. Like I kind of shook hands with 2 founders of a small company and told them that I would make sure that it didn't get crushed, and it didn't. Really small things. When we decided that we wanted to use the First Data call center to help with Clover inbound calls, like I went there, we handpicked the people on the support center that would do it. We painted the walls green. We gave everyone Clover t-shirts, right? It's tiny things like that, but it's about really building that culture of, the acquired company is important and that culture is important. At Tipalti, we did an M&A deal in 2021 for the procurement module. So now it's the procurement module inside of Tipalti's platform. At the time, the company was called Approve.com. And, some things I'm really proud about for that acquisition is the founders of that company are still at Tipalti now, almost 4 years later. They actually have bigger roles now at Tipalti than they did like in their original company. And they're actually not even working on the same things they were working on before. They were working on sort of different aspects of Tipalti's business. I think at the 2-year mark, we had 95% of the team was still at the company.
That's unheard of. Wow.
It's unheard of. And the coolest thing actually about it, which I had nothing to do with at all. I mean, I didn't have anything to do with most of the stuff, but I think the really most interesting story that I tell about this is we actually took the UI, like the design and the color choices that was in the Approve UI, and Tipalti hadn't had a UI upgrade in a couple of years. And we're like, you know what? We really like that UI. And so we actually took the acquired company UI and applied it to the acquisition company, which never happens.
That's also very rare. Usually it's like pushing it down. Like, this is your new color. Take it. This is your new font. We don't use Calibri anymore.
Exactly. Like, no, it's so funny. Now I look at the icons that we use in all the Tipalti stuff and I'm like, oh, that looks like the Approved stuff from back then. So again, I think that some of this comes from like low ego, have a humbleness about it, just choose the best that exist. But I think that is really hard in like large cap strategic M&A, and people kind of forget the importance of those things. It's it's not just the finances that have to work out. It has to be the emotional component and the people component. And you just have to get creative over what that means. But yeah, I think there's, I definitely pride myself on having some good M&A experiences.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Annual planning season is upon us. That's right, my favorite time of year. And it's not just about setting goals for the coming year. It's about ensuring you have the right tools in place to measure and achieve those goals. As a SaaS CFO, I know having access to reliable, real-time metrics is crucial for my annual planning process. That's why I'm so excited to partner with today's sponsor, Maxio. Maxio is a billing and financial operations platform that helps subscription businesses reconcile bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, and SaaS metrics automatically. By the way, guys, bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, not the same thing. Got to get them straight. Because these numbers are the foundation of your financial models, it's important to have quick access and trust that they are correct. Don't let the complexities of SaaS finance and accounting slow you down. If you want to start 2025 with the right tools, check out Maxio by visiting maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. Request a demo through our link to support the podcast, ya boy, and receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. maxio.com/run the numbers. Please, guys, I really need this. Okay, serious question for all my accounting pros here today. Are you doing what you were hired to do? What I mean is, do you have time to actually be a business partner, or are you buried in tedious manual tasks just to get your journal entries prepared every month? I know how that feels. Leapfin's here to help with that. Leapfin is accounting automation software that automatically prepares and posts reliable journal entries. And that's just the beginning. High-growth businesses like Reddit, Canva, and SeatGeek choose Leapfin to eliminate manual tasks, accelerate month-end close, and enable accounting leaders like you to provide faster insights that will help your company grow. If you're battling messy transaction data from Stripe, Adyen, Shopify, Apple Pay, and other PSPs, and then battling again to get it all into NetSuite, go to leapfin.com to watch their short product intro video. And if you like what you see, request a 15-minute conversation to learn how accounting automation can help you and your team. Check out leapfin.com today. That's leap like jump, fin like shark. I just made that up. I hope they're okay with it. Leapfin.com. As a startup CFO, the number one question my friends come to me with is, who do you use for banking? That's right. They don't ask me for my chicken parm recipe, and they don't ask me where I got my dog groomed. I'm the friend they come to for invoicing, credit card, and bank account advice. Go figure. So I thought I'd just come out and answer it for everybody on the podcast. I recently made the switch to Mercury because I was losing my mind trying to get a clear understanding of how cash entered and left the building. Financial operations were getting needlessly complex, and that's coming from someone who does finance stuff for a living. You can't manage what you can't measure, so I made the change. Plus, it took me literally under 10 minutes to go from application to approval. I'm not kidding. It was wild. Mercury simplifies your financial operations with powerful banking, and it gives you greater control, precision, and speed so you can operate at your best. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by the Choice Financial Group and Evolve Banking Trust. Members FDIC. Well, I would say it's not only being creative, it's kind of the put up or shut up, I'll get my hands dirty with you. And it sounds like you have stories of doing just that in the trenches to show them. I'll pick up a shovel.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think, PE Ops is all about, picking up a shovel. And there's so many situations when I was in PE Ops. I'll tell a funny story about Clover. I actually worked the booths at Money 2020 on behalf of Clover, selling to new partnerships, during my time there. And the craziest one of all is when we had to do the photos for our new booths with our new hardware. Were way too cheap to get a hand model or anything like that. And so there was sort of a contest over whose hands were looking the nicest that day or whatever. So my hands were the hand model of all of our imagery for
is that Zoolander that he's a hand model? Is that the movie?
I think it is. Yeah. I'm pretty sure he has better hands than I do, but yeah, whatever. I don't know. I had a good manicure that week or something. So it was just kind of one of those, just do anything. I need to go. I went and implemented, I went to merchants, businesses and put together hardware on site and did troubleshooting. And I also just
you physically set up the portals.
Yeah. Yes,
the credit card swipers. That's hilarious.
Yes, I did. I learned a lot in doing it. I think you learn so much in doing that stuff. It's not. I didn't do it to say I did it or for a vanity project. I did it because I actually learned more in 2 hours in a restaurant while they were trying to handle customer complaints or trying to take orders and also trying to handle, upgrading their software at the same time or their hardware at the same time. Like, you learn so much when you're just drinking from the fire hose that way. It's worth the time. And, you're kind of accelerate your learnings and you're thinking about what to do so much more.
To make that even more real, if you think about, to bring it back to distribution as well, trying to sell into a restaurant that's going to use Clover, being there and seeing that the same person who's the hostess, who's seating people, doing like the charts and whatnot, who's maybe managing the hours of the people coming in, and then they're also picking up the phone and you're trying to sell to them. You don't get that earned secret around how to best reach your customer or how fast you have to talk to them in order to get your point across if you're not there in the restaurant.
100%. And I think that's why oftentimes some of the best sellers come from the industries that they sell to, because they really have an empathy for what the buyer has to go through. I think some of the best technology in the office of CFO focuses their selling team, their solutions consultants or their salespeople on people who used to be I always call them recovering accountants, people who have the accounting degree, but maybe went into solutions consulting or sales or something. There's so much of that. We've hired away a lot of folks who were actually our clients, who implemented Tipalti at their customers. And then they're like, oh, I want to pivot and go into sales. And they've become employees of the company over time. And so, there's so much of that empathy that you just can't replace with knowledge. The empathy has to come from somewhere really at your core.
Did you work on the PE ops side with someone who's been on this podcast?
I did. Yes. Actually, maybe even a couple people, but I think recently I saw Michael Linford from the CFO of a firm. Yeah. He just got posted on his. And actually it's crazy on the PE ops side. And maybe it's because of the experience we all had, but I think half of my star class are now CFOs at public or late stage private companies. And so I do think PE ops tends to be a bit of a feeder into sort of tech, in particular CFO seats.
That's badass. I want to talk about reinventing yourself during growth, because as you mentioned, you're at a company and it's of some significant size now. It's grown from what I could tell, 150 people to maybe close to 1,000 since you joined, something like that. Well, what's been your experience going through this period of hypergrowth when you look at yourself as a leader and as a finance professional trying to build out a team? It's
probably the most interesting thing about the time I've had at Tipalti for me is just how different the company was when I joined 6 years ago. And we were about 100 employees when I joined, less than $1 million in revenue per month back then, very small in the grand scheme of things. And, we're now almost 1,200 employees. And all the other metrics have outpaced that growth as well. And so just the number of customers we serve, revenue, all the payments volume that we're putting through the business, it's just really quite massive. And as I think about that as a CFO seat, oftentimes, and especially for me, that early role as CFO, it was very broad. I think I had IT, I had HR, I had finance, I had legal, I had a whole bunch of stuff that I was sort of covering. And a lot of it was just playing quarterback and keeping the ships moving in the right direction while I built out my finance organization. I was the very first finance hire into Tipalti. So no other employees with a finance background. We used some outsourced accountants. We had some advisors, but in reality, we were using our own product internally. And so we were able to get away without having very many finance people because we were using our own product. And for me, I got a chance to build it from the ground up. Every employee on the finance team at Tipalti, I have been part of their hiring. And that's a really unique experience, I think, for a CFO who's now running kind of more than 1,000 people CFO to have been kind of done that growth with the company in lockstep. And when I think about it now, there's that funny quote from, I think it's Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where it's if you don't look back, you won't acknowledge how much has changed. You might miss it. I can't remember. It's a butchering of that quote, but I actually think that line is really interesting to my experience here, which is that I really had to be cognitive of the times and points in time in which I need to sit down and say, okay, what is best and highest use for me and my job today? How has that changed since 6 months ago? And how will that change 6 months from now? What are the big projects I'm working on? And how can I free up more capacity for myself to go spend more thoughtful time on those things? And then also the flip side of that is how can I help my team grow and get to have new experiences by taking some stuff that, I'm doing today and make sure that other people who could equally do that work In fact, if they could do it better, I should have already given it to them, but can at minimum equally do that work and give it to them so that they can expand their scopes as well. I think that the job goes from breadth in really early stage startups to kind of depth in what I'm doing today. And then now it's actually going back to breadth where I sort of have the depth on the finance side, but I'm now, the problems are much more complicated and they involve a lot more peer-to-peer collaboration.
Right.
And so you kind of get back to that breadth view, but it's not breadth through ownership and accountability. Like it's breadth through influence, which is like really different than the kind of first version of breadth in my first role here at Perpetually, which was really, I owned all these functions, go do what I'm saying I'm going to go do. Now it's how do I influence without authority and how do I expand that breadth that way?
The breadth versus depth, I feel like when you first join a company and you're either the first G&A hire or the first finance person, it ends up being like, oh, we don't know where this goes. Let's give it to Sarah or let's give it to CJ. Like, I'm sure you'll figure out what to do with it.
Yeah. I remember there was a couple of times where I was like, did I just miss the meeting? And that's why this got assigned to me. And like, maybe I need to make sure I don't miss any more meetings. That actually happened fairly recently. So it doesn't ever change, I guess.
I'm in charge of legal, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So no, not now. We've got a fantastic GC here. It's helping out, but yeah, I think that is part of it in really early stage startups. I think they're also like, that's kind of the mentality likely of people who choose that job.
Oh yeah.
So for me, it's like, I love building. I love having my hands into everything. I actually think I'm better at my job if I sort of know a little bit about a lot of things, especially early on. And I know I'm much better at my job now because I did that 6 years ago. And yeah, is it crazy that I approved every expense report in the company for a year? Like sort of, but also that gave me experience and, visibility into something much broader. And, of course that has to change over time or else, I can't do other things that are, frankly higher and better use of my time. But yeah.
The two concepts that we're speaking about are kind of antithetical to each other because you have to be willing to jump in and do whatever it takes, but you also have to be able to step back and say, this is still the highest use of my time.
Yes, I think they are antithetical. And I guess that's why I say that for me, this framework, it has to be really purposeful. I think my natural sort of character, and maybe other CFOs will feel similarly because it's like, we love the details, we love the data, you couldn't rip Excel out of my cold dead hands, like that type of an approach. I think that's what a lot of CFOs sort of are like.
Yeah.
And so I think like I've had to be really mindful about it and say, okay, what am I doing now? What are the best and highest use of my time? What is stuff that I'm working on that someone else could definitely do? And the fact that I'm not handing it over is actually like a bad thing for me. It's actually feedback I need to give myself that I'm stunting someone else's growth. So for me, I have to be really, really purposeful about it. It doesn't come naturally to me.
Yeah.
But I've had to really work on it.
We spoke with Molly Graham, who wrote the canonical piece, Giving Up Your Legos. Mm-hmm. That was something that I went through, and it felt emotional at the time because I'd gone from owning FP&A and treasury and investor relations at a company that went from 150 to 1,500 people in 3 years. And along the way, to your point, you bring in people that are more specialized. And sometimes you do have to admit that person's actually better at this than I am.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I think also the other side of that is within finance, you're constantly wanting to be the most diligent with your resources. And so I also think that finance people wait too long to hire some of those specialists to come in who do the work better than them or who have more experience and it's less about their own ego about, I could just do this as well as these people can. It's that, I don't need the help. I'll just work a little extra or I'll do this in my nights and weekends. And so I think there's definitely times for that. There's definitely times, and the macro has been challenging for the last couple of years. I'm sure that there's CFOs who would have wanted to hire more people and more specialists. But so there's certainly times to be frugal and like overly frugal, maybe even to the point of, holding people back. But I also think it's a little bit of the mindset of the CFO of not investing there. And so oftentimes people are too late to bring in that, the specialist IR person. Because, is IR really a full-time job as a, Series C or Series D company? Like, and that's the question mark everyone has.
Well, as Sam Zell, famous real estate investor, used to say, we're cursed because we know the numbers. And I find that true for finance people because we see the P&L. We see how much a specialist IR person would cost. We don't allow ourselves to do that, but it ends up being our Achilles heel. Or another analogy would be like the carpenter who builds other people's houses all day, but his own house is half done. I joke with CFOs on the podcast all the time that we're often the last group that we actually grant headcount to.
Yeah. 100%. And I think especially the last couple of years, a bit of leading from the top and, and if I'm holding my peers to a certain level and bar, as far as headcount growth, as an example, I have to kind of be holding myself to an even, lower bar. No, I do think that means a little bit more creativity and innovation around stuff like, digital transformations. And I do think that is actually helpful for the office of CFO, which is, you've got to get more creative over how to do a lot more with less. And so there's a number of these technologies that I think are being benefited by CFOs realizing that they can't solve it with headcount and they need to get creative on the tools and make sure the tech stack is right. So, on the plus side, I do think that means the CFO tech stack is ripe for more innovation.
I agree. Sarah, you mentioned reassessing the ROI of your own time. Can you give an example of something that you've looked at maybe in the last 6 to 12 months that you said, hey, I should change up the way that I'm handling this?
So some examples for me would be things like, and I have great sort of number twos across my team, and I'm really lucky to have that and just have really good, frankly, consistency of the team. But, an example is up until maybe a year or two ago, I would review like every commission statement, sort of the kind of every 2 weeks before doing commissions, sort of every commission statement. And just for, my own gut check, my own, understanding where things were. And now I look at like summary and maybe have a quick conversation if there's one or two things that seem off. So like I'm much less in the details on that side. And that's really an example of something where I was just becoming, frankly, a bottleneck. And people were closer to the data, much, much closer to the data than I was. And I need to give autonomy to the team to be able to do it. I think about like that as an example of really my role there was really a sales finance role. And so now if I say, listen, I don't need to do that sales finance role, the question is like, how do I allocate that time to other things that might help our sales team? And so I actually spend that time now doing stuff like customer calls or prospect calls or talking to other CFOs. And actually that's a much better use and a much higher ROI for my time than being, a second approver on a certain internal, process. So that's like kind of an example of one of the things I've done recently. But I think the best situation here is it just happens all the time. And it also happens in ways where you're opening up an opportunity instead of maybe writing the full strategic memo on a decision that's made. You write the outline of it and you hand it to someone who gets their first shot at writing the full version, and then they come back to you for revision. So it's also a lot of things like that are a bit more in the process, making sure that you're giving the right input to make sure people don't waste their own time, but that you're letting people take the pen for the first time that can really develop their career and really give them more ownership over something.
That was such an excellent explanation, because not only did you explain what you gave up, you explained what you took on because you had more time. And that allowed me to see, that actually is a much better trade-off. Now for you, it seems like they made you the pitch woman to a certain degree because you're probably dog fooding your own product. So maybe they should also pay you a marketing salary as well now.
Yeah, I should get some shadow quota for influence or something.
You should get a commission plan, then you can check that.
Yeah, exactly.
Sarah, I want to see if this resonates with you. A friend recently said to me that, seed stage, it's 90% solving problems, 10% dealing with people issues. So that's on the left side of the spectrum. On the right side of the spectrum, you have IPO. And once you get there, it's 10% time spent solving problems, 90% dealing with people. Does that sound remotely correct to you?
Yeah, I can see where the adage comes from, I guess. I have 7-year-old twins. And so someone said to me once, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems, which maybe is the parenting version of what you just described.
Yeah, it is.
So, I think when companies are smaller, everyone like personally, and you know them deeply, and they understand how their work contributes to this broader mission. And there's also those personal connections. And anytime there's actually a personal connection, if there is something that's said or there's an issue or whatever, it kind of just the personal connection rounds that out and makes people just much more likely to be like, hey, I don't think I understood you right, or I don't think I heard that right, or I have a different opinion on this. Can we talk about it? Instead of maybe letting those feelings fester. And you obviously can't do that. You can do that at 100 employees or maybe a few hundred employees. You can't do that at 1,000 or a few thousand employees. And so I think that the people issues are maybe called people issues, but I don't think it's from like necessarily bad hiring or, less strong individuals or anything like that. I think it really comes down to communication and alignment. And so you have to spend so much more time in a bigger company, in a leadership position in a bigger company, focusing on, are we communicating the vision and the reasoning behind these actions? Are we aligned on it across the company? Is it not just the most senior level or the most, 2 to 3 levels of the company, but like really at the core, individual contributor, first line manager, second line manager level, it's everyone really understanding how their piece fits in with the broader conversation, the broader mission. And I think that engagement is really important. And it's not really necessarily people issues, but it's about how do you get past the people issues by getting that alignment and making sure you're communicating things really, really well. And that is much harder in bigger companies. Yeah, we do an annual engagement scores, as I'm sure lots of companies do. And, recently I was reading through some comments and someone had sort of sent the comments, anything that involved me, even if it wasn't part of my team. And I received a comment that I was someone that was easy to talk to bring feedback to, and they felt comfortable sort of discussing difficult topics with. And it was honestly the best feedback I've gotten. And it's not from someone on my team. I would expect that with anyone on my team, but it's someone who doesn't work on my team, who feels like they could come to me and I would appreciate that feedback. I wouldn't hold it against them. And I would actively look at seeing, hey, like, is this valid, or how do we think about this in the context of what we're trying to do? And so like, it's that kind of stuff's not going to show up in a scoreboard, I think, as leaders. I think that stuff is so important to sort of the fabric of how companies scale. And I think you need more of that as you get bigger, because the distance between any one person from any other person is just so much greater that you need more of those kind of scaffolds of alignment and communication to make everyone feel like they're adding value and impacting, where they spend half of their waking hours, which is
right.
Really
This may be a stupid way of phrasing this question. Do you ever feel like as a leader, as the company gets bigger, you're repeating yourself a lot?
To be fair, I don't think I'm repeating myself enough, but yes. I mean, I think that adage of like, tell them once, then tell them why you told them, and then tell them again what you told them.
Tell them that you told them. Yeah, I've heard that too.
That is 100% true. And I'm pretty sure even if I think I'm doing it enough, I'm not.
Right.
So yes and yes, I guess, to answer your question.
I saw a tweet, it was by Jason Lemkin, I think of SaaStr, and he said that the best CEOs are very comfortable with telling the exact same story over and over and over again, almost to the point that not that it's disingenuous at all, but it's just almost like an actor getting up there to present what they're doing. And sometimes it does feel like I'm a broken record, but it's probably just me in my head repeating to my team and to everybody else. Because you have to remember, A, not everybody receives information and digests the same way. And B, there are multiple levels of the org that you're talking to at any given time. And for information to cascade down, it has to make it through all those different levels. And something gets inevitably lost along the way.
I think that's true. I would say a C, or corollary to what you've just said, is also that I think when the CFO does that in a company, because of the trust people put in the office of the CFO or in finance, kind of, a truthful teller of the numbers. I just, not that everyone isn't true, but I do think that the finance team, when you have that trust, and again, you can never break that trust, but when you have that trust with the team that says, listen, I'm going to tell you numbers, I'm never not going to tell you the truthful numbers. I may choose not to answer your question. You may ask a question I can't answer publicly, and that's okay. It has to be okay. But the numbers I do tell you will always be truthful. And so I do think that there is a power in that. There's also, you have to respect that power. But I do think that having more visible CFOs, and I talk about this with some of the members of my CFO like networks around like, how do they create that environment for themselves, internally to sort of help smooth that over, because you're a trusted name and a trusted resource.
How visible do you think a CFO should be internally, externally? And I ask that because a lot of people have this preconceived notions of CFOs just like behind some glass door, like on a computer. But it feels like over the last 10 years, CFOs are much more in the org day to day.
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I are probably speaking from the same place as far as the size of businesses and types of businesses and things like that, where I think CFOs, the more visible they can be, the better. When I took this job, I didn't think about it that way. And mind you, I was taking a job in a company that sells to CFOs. So maybe I was very naive in that approach, but I didn't really think about that as much. But I think as we've gotten bigger, it's become a bigger part of my role. And I do talk to a lot of CFOs who really feel like this is, very important to them and like what value they can bring to the company as far as being visible internally. And the visibility externally, it always depends, depending on the stage, are they bootstrapped or are they looking for investments or what stage of company they're in? I think that often changes more the approach on that. But I do believe that, the strategic CFO is much more the norm in companies like, where you and I are at. And it is about the numbers, about having incredible depth knowledge of the numbers, but it's not just about the numbers. It has to be around strategy, vision, alignment, and sort of everything else. And so I do think CFOs sort of have that balancing that they have to do both internally and externally as far as how visible they should be.
And Sarah, you teed me up nicely here because it does feel like past a certain stage in size, let's say 100 million, 250 million in revenue, and you're still private on top of that, you get a ton of requests to participate in these conferences and on panels. It's like a hurricane of all these invites coming into your inbox. How do you pick which ones to engage with?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I battled this for quite a while, thinking through how to do it. I think on the one hand, I think naturally people want to be people pleasers. And so when you're a CFO and you're getting all these inbound messages from investors, from bankers, from all these different groups wanting your time, it can feel like, oh, of course, like I should say yes to this. I should say yes to this. This is a good opportunity. And I think I had to really think about what does that mean for me as far as how much time I should allocate to this and how I should prioritize that time. And I went through a bit of an exercise. I'm also really data driven. And so I didn't know how to basically make a decision on this.
Yeah.
So I went to the public comps of the companies that I either admire because of the space that they're in and what they're doing in Office of CFO, even if it's not really a comp to Tipalti or like anything that's more or less a direct comp. And I looked to see for all the banks who the equity researcher was for each that was doing coverage for each of these names. And I had a little spreadsheet and I was like, okay, well, who's got an equity researcher covering all of these names? Who's really doubling down? Who did their IPOs? Which banks did their IPOs? Who are the people on those banks that did the IPOs? And I kind of have a spreadsheet to try to be like, let me take something that's really an ambiguous question. Who should I spend most time with to learn about this market, to learn about how investors think about our market, who are going to have the most information and insight on this market? And I, tried to kind of put a framework around it. And so I did this and it's like desk work, you do it when you have the time. And it got me down to this list. Instead of having 20, big banks, some of which are the big name banks and some of which are the smaller investment banks on my list and feeling like I had to give each of them a little bit of time and attention or go to one of their conferences, I ended up with a much shorter list, right? And then I could really focus on those folks and really build deeper relationships with those folks. Ultimately over time, it's the depth of those relationships that really matter. These are people that you have to trust innately at different stages in the company life. And so for me, I wanted to have fewer of those relationships, but really go deep with them. And so this helped me cut through a lot of the noise. And then it helps me think about, okay, well, how many days a year do I want to spend doing these conferences? Okay, well, what are the big conferences from each of these banks that really do well? Is there any other banks that I think do something interesting in the space? And it allowed me to build a calendar that I feel like is still it's a lot, frankly, for being a late stage private company, to do the number of events that I do. But it's now feels purposeful around a strategy of how I want to think about building relationships and having enough at-bats with people and investors to then have that help inform how we think about, what our strategy is around important things like investment and future, fundraising and things like that. So yeah, I don't know if that helps a little bit. It's sort of a tactical way to think about it.
That's super tactical. And that's actually the inside baseball that people come to the podcast for. So thank you for sharing that, because there's definitely a bunch of people listening who are saying, I don't know which one to choose. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that I feel kind of special when someone from Morgan Stanley reaches out and wants to spend time with me. But then you look at your calendar, you wake up one day and you're like, oh, I'm spending 70% of my time externally facing. I have to actually grow this company.
Yeah. I got this, not the idea about like how to, build a database to think about who to spend time with, but I actually got the idea originally from one of my mentors, Scott Wagner. So shout out to him. He was at KKR Capstone with me and led up the firm in the US. And then he was a COO and CFO at GoDaddy and then the CEO of GoDaddy. So it should be a fairly well-known name. And he talked about this with me when I came to him and said, I don't know what to do. I can't keep saying yes to these people, even though it is, again, as you say, it is flattering when these big name banks that have such a wonderful reputation and are the movers and shakers in this space want to spend time with you. You of course want to say yes. And he had this principle of saying he was like 2 to 3 days, a quarter to it. When he's doing it, he does it full time. He doesn't try to take, one-on-ones and then, slice in other meetings and just make it really complicated. He gives 2 to 3 days a quarter. It's known in advance. It's scheduled out in advance. And he's really very mindful around it because he needed to go run a big business, which was GoDaddy at the time. And that was what he could give. And so anyway, I always thought about it that way. And I was like, well, if he can do that at a company that's much larger, pre-IPO, then maybe other people can do it as well.
That's an amazing way to think about it. We had spoken to Chad Gold, the CFO of G2, formerly of SalesLoft, and he was explaining that ultimately you're measured on the depth of your relationships with the right people, and you want to build lines, not dots. And it kind of feels similar to what you were saying, Sarah, that yes, you technically could have all these surface level or one-time meetings or maybe 2 times meetings with all these people. But at the end of the day, you're looking for a core set of investors and people to partner with in the capital markets. You don't need everyone. Yeah,
you don't need everyone. And probably more true than that, you really only need, if it comes from a fundraising round, you kind of only need one, right? And so again, that's not the stage we're in, but if I think back many years ago, that's how I would think about it if I was a CFO of a B or C stage company and thinking about what the next, milestones I had to hit to get the next kind of fundraising. It is a really how do you know that one? So I do think that makes a lot of sense. Someone asked me when we did our fundraise in 2021, and they asked me sort of, how did I, pick these investors? And the funny thing about it is if I went one by one through each of these investors, these are all people that I had met, minimum 6 months earlier, if not, 12 to 18 months earlier. Some of them I knew from my business school network, some of whom I had met, but then we realized we had all these common friends. And so I'd already referenced, checked, and back channeled to them through other, friends or work acquaintances or my professional network. And so, when it came time to get a deal done, it's kind of feels like it's really fast. Everyone talks about, or back then in 2020, 21, everyone talked about kind of, we raised this, big deal, $300 million really quickly. But in reality, it just was really quickly from, kind of diligence to term sheet, to sort of final commitment. But the length of time was really the 18 months. Oh, yeah. So, it's that legwork that's really important. And that legwork is even more important now, right? I just think people want to get to know you. They want to hear what you have to say. And then they want to come back to you 6 months later and say, are you saying the same stuff you said 6 months ago?
Right.
And that just, that's one of the important ways to build that trust and credibility.
Do you think that there's a risk as a CFO of being perceived as perpetually in market?
I don't think that there is as much, I don't think going to these events means you're in market. I mean, if you're a publicly traded CFO, you kind of have to do 2 or 3.
Yeah, it's part of your job.
Single year. It's your job. It is a core element of your job.
Right.
I think as a private company CFO, again, I'm pretty clear with when I'm doing these meetings, listen, this is me just getting to know you. I want to hear about your fund. I don't do large group meetings generally. I think that they're sort of a waste of time. And I think those meetings can often be the situation in which a CFO feels like they're always in market. It's speed dating, but 5-on-1, never a good look. But I do think that one-on-one meetings where you're really trying to learn about the fund, if you don't know them well, and how they make decisions is really crucial information that then helps you manage better at a future date how to work with them.
I really like how you called out that you'll start whatever it is, a call or a meeting, by saying, this is where I am in my process, if there is a process, and how I look at kind of the context of this meeting, because you have to set those guardrails, or else it's kind of like this funny feeling out thing of are you raising money? Are you not raising money? How do I approach this?
Yeah, I think it's important, and maybe more so now than ever, right? To be really clear on what your goal is out of those sessions.
Sarah, as you climb the ladder in any role, something that I've observed, and I started my career at PwC, and I realized that all the partners there were essentially salespeople, not necessarily consultants anymore. I mean, I'm sure it's the same thing with investment bankers that I've talked to too. They're doing sales in their role. Head of a law firm, you're also doing sales. Do you think that a CFO inherently gets to a point where a part of their job is to do sales? And if so, what are those types of sales that you may be doing?
Yeah. So, apart from the fact that, again, Tipalti is selling to the office of CFO. So certainly my job probably looks more salesy than most people's job. But
probably more than others.
Probably more than others. Yeah, you know what the funny thing is I remember distinctly talking to my mentor when I was at Bain & Company, the consulting firm. And I remember saying to him, I don't think I'm going to be a good Bain partner because I don't want to have to keep going and selling work. And that's what partners do. And now to be where I am today, or where I was at KKR, where kind of everyone, you become a salesperson. Everyone is a salesperson. I actually love spending time with our sales team. I was at Sweet World a couple of weeks ago. I picked up the mouse and was doing demos for a customer. And of course, my salespeople was like, what are you doing? But she had a question. I actually knew how to, she was an existing customer.
I'm trying to hit my number. What are you doing?
Exactly. I knew how to answer the question. So I was like, oh, let me just show you. She asked a question. I was like, no, we actually have that feature. Go here, and you'll see it. And she was like, oh, this is fantastic. You just solved something that I was struggling with. So I think being close to sales is really important. I think as a CFO, in an enterprise tech, sales is so important. And so being really close to sales, being really empathetic towards what your sales team is doing and how they're growing the business, and having a really close relationship between the CRO and the head of finance. We have a great relationship here, but I have been told by a lot of the VPs on the sales force, this is not how it always is. Oftentimes finance and sales are a bit butting heads. And so I'm proud that that's not the case. But yeah, I think everyone is a salesperson. That's really internally is a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of it is that internal company side of it. But, I think it helps for me. It helps when I speak with investors that if they have a question about, go to market and how our sales is working, I can answer it. I obviously can bring in my peers to also answer it, but I have a lot of granular visibility into that side of the world. And obviously, if they're asking me about the product, I'm going to answer the question from the sake as a user, which might even be more impactful. And so I do think having, again, the breadth and depth that you get in the CFO role, it's just such a beautiful thing. I really enjoy it. It helps keep my brain constantly inspired. And yeah, I think CFOs being good at sales is probably a more of a positive than a negative.
And you're also selling the company in your group to prospective employees that you want to hire. People forget that the most talented people usually aren't on a beach just waiting for your call. They're usually doing something that's pretty badass, and you have to convince them to come work for you. So I feel like in any leadership role you're in, you have to be able to sell why working with you is a great idea.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really important lever when it comes to hiring.
Sarah, I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So
all right.
You're really successful. We know that by now, but you got to give me one thing you've screwed up on the job. It could be this role or a different one.
Yeah. I mean, I can think of one really good example from my early career. I had just graduated with a mathematics degree from undergrad, and it was my first real job at Bain. And I remember I built this model that used second derivatives to explain the future changes, the acceleration of the pace of market share gains. And I was really proud of it. For one hand, it actually worked. So it back tested really well, which doesn't always happen in these models.
Yeah.
And I thought the innovation was just awesome. No one else can be giving this client this type of innovation. But on the other hand, my clients who were really, really smart, they sort of just glazed over when I tried to explain the methodology. And I came across as really academic and really young and just not as practical. And I think I really learned in that situation that the best solutions often are the simplest ones, the ones that get to the best outcomes, but also do it in as simple and easy to understand type of way. And the complexity that I had brought to that solution made it actually less useful. Tactically, as a consultant, I was going to leave that project and I was going to leave that model in the hands of the team at the company. And that model was never going to live past my time there because no one else was going to be able to, update it or would have the knowledge to be able to continue to use it in time when I had built it on such sort of overly complex, structures. And so therefore, by definition, I wasn't going to have long-term impact, which is ultimately what I wanted to have. So anyway, it was a tough learning because I'd spent a lot of time on this thing and ultimately kind of shown into the trash can. But It also was very, very important, I think, for me to make that jump from being smart and academic and having a lot of knowledge and then saying, how can I make this practical? Because it's not knowledge that I'm going for. I'm going for a practical outcome or impact that I can have.
Every finance person listening to this podcast right now is thinking about the time that they built this Excel model that could not only do this cool VLOOKUP double sum if, but like it could also make you breakfast in the morning if you wanted it to. And then they're like, hey, you could have just made this sum the column, and nobody can fix it either. Like you've created the Mona Lisa, but like nobody could go in and change the oil on it after you leave the room.
Yeah. The macros get broken and like the thing goes in the trash, right?
Totally. If you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell her?
Yeah. So I was really, really athletic growing up, played 3 varsity sports and was recruited actually for all 3 sports at different colleges at different levels. And I ended up playing basketball in college at a D3 school and just loved it. Kind of for me, sports and competitiveness was just part of my life. So interestingly enough, I never learned how to play golf. And my dad always wanted for me to learn how to play golf. We would have this constant fight where he would threaten to buy me a set of golf clubs and then I would threaten to never use them. So they would sit and collect dust. And then like stubbornly we'd go back and forth because we both wouldn't want to waste the money. And so anyway, it became this long-winded sort of father-daughter skirmish over golf. And, I'm now in my 40s. I've had a couple of knee surgeries. I get so many invitations to play golf as networking opportunities or as opportunities to just kind of go experience the world. Not shockingly, I have not gotten a single pickup basketball invitation. So, unfortunately, that skill set has not sort of transferred over into my professional world. But yeah, it's just, I really wish I'd learned how to play golf. I think if I had learned when I was younger and sort of got comfort with it, now I just say no to all these invitations and maybe I need to spend some time playing golf. But you can't tell, but I'm 6'1". And so I have the wingspan of, I don't know, my brother and I call ourselves having condor-like wingspan. Yeah. And so off of a women's tee, this was always my dad's impression, he said, off of a women's tee with your wingspan, Sarah, like you would hit the green every single time, and I think he might be sort of true still to this day. So anyway, maybe I should learn how to play golf.
It's not too late. But yeah, no one's ever been like, hey, you know what? We're going to this networking event. We're going to toss a pigskin. Can you bring your cleats? Like that's just like literally never happened.
Yeah. 100%. It's like, well, to be fair, at KKR, we used to do some of those things until we had a very competitive game of beach volleyball.
Partner always tears an ACL. That's how it always ends.
Yeah, totally did. And so I think the people that ran our insurance were like, we cannot have any more Achilles and ACL injuries come against our workers' comp. So KKR Capstone needs to stop playing like competitive tackle sports.
Because it's all type A people. Like they're going to go hard.
Yeah. No, I mean, at one point in time, we had like the former Stanford quarterback, the former Notre Dame quarterback. Like we had actually like a pretty solid teams going on. And meanwhile, people were getting injured at, company sponsored offsites. So we had to sort of say no to that.
That's amazing. Sarah, can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools does your team use to get the job done?
Yeah, absolutely. So our ERP is NetSuite. Shout out to NetSuite. It sounds like you guys are sponsor this pod. So we've been on it since 2020. It was the first thing I did when I moved over to Tipalti. Yeah, it won't shock you to know that we use Tipalti for a lot of our tech stack. So for all procurement, purchase rec, creation, PO approvals, tracking accruals, PO matching. And we use it for all of our Tipalti AP automation platform for receiving invoices, syncing to the ERP, vendor management, vendor onboarding, tax compliance, banking information. So kind of everything on that side of the house. And then all of our payouts globally. So we essentially don't use our bank accounts to do any payments out, which is a massive risk mitigant. So we just don't do any like one-off wires like that. All of our payments go through Tipalti globally across 6 entities and 6 currencies for Tipalti. So that's that. And then more recently, we launched an employee expense portal, Tipalti did. And so we do all of our expense reimbursements, expense management cards through that. And we were on Expensify before we switched over to our own product. On the pay-in side, we use a product called Billing Platform for all of our invoicing and sort of billing needs. We also have some custom tools there. We have a pretty complicated revenue stream model around invoicing for SaaS, around sort of consumption and usage models. So it's a pretty complicated part of our revenue. And so, Billing Platform's been great to scale with that. I think quickly down the rest of the stuff. So we use ShareWorks for equity. We use Captivate IQ, which is an awesome tool for commissions, especially for usage-based stuff. We use Adaptive for FP&A, Flowcast for close management, and Sovos for tax. Yeah. So yeah, that's probably the biggest ones. We've been trialing a bunch of smaller tools, AI tools, like kind of some newer startups and things like that. But that's probably the core of it.
That's impressive. It's like you work in this space or something.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Last one I got for you. What's the craziest thing you've ever had someone try to expense?
So it's ticket related, but there's two of them. One was $20,000 NBA finals tickets, and the other was someone who expensed a parking ticket. Like they just, didn't pay attention and just parked illegally. And they tried.
Was it for maybe a sales meeting? I don't know.
Yeah, no, the parking ticket's the question on that one. They both have a little bit of the in the bright, the sunshine test, like in the bright light of day. How does it pass the sunshine test? But I feel like some people have much, much better stories in this one. But I guess relatedly, though, I do think it's interesting. I'm sure you get these all the time, but like the number of times that I get an offer to pay me like $500 or $1,000 to participate in a demo as a CFO, I'm just often appalled by that. And I don't know I think CFOs are sort of the worst audience to do those types of outreaches. It just screams sort of waste to me. And then I wonder what other money your company is wasting. So anyway, I always find it interesting when I get those types of really out there expenses.
I have 3 of those invites sitting in my inbox right now, and one company that wants to buy me AirPods to take a demo, which I will admit I lose my AirPods constantly. So I did think about that one for about 2 seconds, and then I was like, nah, I can't do that.
Yeah, no, exactly. I don't know. Maybe I'm too much of a goody two shoes for that, but I just find that those ones are always appalling to me.
Awesome. Well, Sarah, this has been a blast. I appreciate you joining the pod.
I appreciate it. It's really fun, CJ.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.